Hello, my name is Thomas Carino, and today I'm interviewing Steve Stamper, who is a manager that I have known for quite some time. We previously worked with PricewaterhouseCoopers together, or at PricewaterhouseCoopers together, and wanted to get his expertise on these questions for our project. So Steve, can you start off by explaining your current role and give a quick summary of your managerial experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So like you said, Steve Stamper, I'm a senior manager in corporate accounting for Wolverine Worldwide in Rockford, Michigan. That I'll say entails overseeing the external reporting, SEC reporting primarily, internal consolidation and reporting, and then corporate accounting areas. So specific areas of accounting around, you know, pension accounting, lease accounting, fixed assets, etc. Um, And then, so I've been at Wolverine a little over 5 years now. I've been in a manager role for about three and a half, managing a team of three individuals currently. Um, and that's kind of grown over time where it started with a focus on the SEC piece and then kind of evolved into some more of the internal reporting and other responsibilities that I've kind of accumulated over the years. And like you mentioned, we shared some time together at PwC, and that I think is kind of the beginning of the managerial experience, just in terms of taking less experienced associates to plant visits and things like that, where we're kind of you're maybe not in an official leadership role or capacity, but still acting in that function and kind of the leading and mentoring and stuff like that. But
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. No, I feel the same way that was where my first managerial experience was on those plant visits and things like that as a senior associate is what we were
Mhm.
back then.
Oh yeah.
All right, so that brings us to our next question here. So when in your current role, and and correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe you've hired some individuals. So when hiring individuals, do you look for more human capital skills, essentially like knowledge of the role, experience in the role that you're hiring for, having skills that apply to that role, or do you focus more on assessing their social capabilities based on what you hear about prior relationships or examples of trustworthiness in their prior work? And cooperative efforts and things like that. What's more your focus when hiring?
Yeah, so I think one of the nice things about accounting specifically, right, is there's obviously a kind of a baseline like technical skill set that people need, but there's also mechanisms at play that kind of help check that box, right? Like I know if someone has a CPA license that they have certain understanding of how accounting works from a technical perspective, and then if they have public accounting experience, I have a pretty good idea of what that entails, and you can get to the bottom of exactly what they did pretty quickly. But to your point, I've hired or been involved in hiring several people in my role. We have a tendency of people moving around as well. So I've hired people and watched them move on to other groups internally. Um, but back to your question, so the technical side is important, but I think you kind of check that box by reviewing a resume. So
Right.
when I get into an actual interview, I'm really focused on more of the soft skills, right? I'm trying to get around to, how dedicated are they, and kind of not to employ hyperbole, but just in kind of honing their craft, right? Like, do they have the intangible, um, I'll say attributes to want to improve and what's the word I'm looking for here? But
Grow, something like
yeah,
that.
like, do they want to grow their career? Are they intellectually curious, right?
Yeah. Yep.
I always
Yep.
ask people that. And I really think from as long as they have that base skill set, right? I feel that me and the leadership team can teach them the specific skills that they need. So it's really about that willingness to learn, that again, intellectual curiosity, and just are they going to come in and be a good team player, right? Like something goes wrong in consolidations and we need someone to lean in there, great. Another quarter, it might be, we have extra compliance responsibilities that we need people to lean into. So those are the things that I'm looking for, because ultimately that's what's going to make them successful in the organization and on the team are those soft skills.
Right. Somebody who can put maybe their personal needs aside, not all the time, but for a night here or there to kind of benefit the team and the organization in general. Makes a lot of sense. All right. So shifting gears here a bit. So conflict management, when confronted with a problem at work, specifically involving one with people you manage, right? How does that look? How do you begin to solve that problem? What does that kind of look like?
Sure. So I think the first thing is understanding kind of the root cause of the problem. And is it the individual? Is it a specific context with the work itself? Is it a larger problem that they can't control, right? Or is it something that's recurring in nature, right? Like that, like,
Yeah.
sometimes you have someone that hits deadlines every time and they miss one. It's probably not them. There's probably something else going on. So I think it's it's finding a way to get to that root cause and then determining wh- how to go from there, right? How
Right.
do you um and
How do you
I think
address
one of
next
the
steps, right?
yeah, and I think one of
Yeah.
the big things is trying to figure out what you don't want to do, and you know this as well as I do, but is treat a problem that is not the person's, I'll say, fault or out of their control. And then you demotivate them, you disincentivize them to work hard because all of a sudden they feel like they can't win or something like that. And I think the big thing, like as a manager, I really view a big part of my role as removing obstacles in people's day-to-day work and how do they get to their goal and what can I do to remove any obstacles. Which
I
also
think,
kind of
yeah, that's
helps
awesome.
prevent
I think
that.
I think that's great. I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think that's something that's similar to I've seen, right? That I've had people who have just consistently delivered, and then out of nowhere, kind of something happens one day, and it's one of those things that you've got to dig into the why and where it's coming from, as opposed to like this happened, this is bad, fix it. So totally agree with you
And
on that one.
And I think a big piece of leading with emotional intelligence is empathizing with people and understanding, what do they have going on outside of work and not in a prying way or, hey, tell me why you missed this deadline. What's going on at home, right? Not like that, but understanding, hey, it's a whole person. It's not just the 8+ hours they're at work. It's 24 hours, 7 days a week. So
Yeah.
um I think leading with empathy is kind of the big piece of that.
Yeah, yeah, I like that. I think that essentially just eliminated one of our later questions because you answered it right there about being an emotionally intelligent individual. I definitely get that vibe from your managerial style, and the time that I worked with you at PwC, I understood that as well. So, um, all right, so I think I know the answer to this next one, but I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are. So, do you think your attitude has a direct impact on those you manage at work? Provide some examples, if you can, of a time you've noticed that maybe it has or it hasn't, or whatever you feel.
Sure. So first part of that question, 100%, right? Like the higher up you are in an
Mhm.
organization, I think a rule of thumb is the more people are talking about you when they're not at work, right? Like we leave work, we're probably talking about something the CFO or the CEO said. As an analyst, when I was an analyst, I was talking about how my manager was behaving, and I think good and bad, right?
Yeah.
Like, hey, so and so was in a really good mood today, or they took the time to coach me through this, and it really made a difference in my day. So I absolutely think in a leadership position, your emotions and your responses to things are magnified. Um, and I think that, I mean, maybe not a specific example, but in a general
Yeah.
sense, when a problem comes up, if you can set aside any initial concerns or I don't want to say panic because that's dramatic, but any initial concerns and kind of focus on, all right, what's our solution? What's our next step forward? I think especially people who are younger in their career really feed off of that. And if you get worried as the person quote unquote in charge, they're immediately also going to become worried. And also if you show frustration, right? And we're all human. None of us are perfect. I think one thing I try to lead with a lot of authenticity where I don't tell people everything's, butterflies and rainbows every day because the reality is yeah, sometimes things are hard or they don't go the way you might have hoped. And but I think people they learn to kind of appreciate that, but also again, they certainly feed off of negative and positive emotions.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think that's something huge that I've recognized too. I mean, I had an example of it where we had an engineer come up and we had a product that was literally about to be shipped out the door, and the bill of materials wasn't complete yet, and kind of came to me knowing that I could help him. And rather than be like, what's going on? Why isn't this done? Just kind of sat with him and was like, all right, here's what needs to happen. Here's what you can do. Here's what I can do. And we worked through it, right? And created
Exactly.
a very reliable relationship in that term when that happened. So totally agree with you there.
And you get the
Um,
positive out of negative, right? Hey, this is a stressful, bad situation, but now we kind of came together, figured out a good response, and now we know a better way going forward.
Exactly. And then built into that is also coaching them on how to avoid it in the future, right? Like how to prevent this from happening again in a kinder way. So totally agree. All right. So I think these last two questions here, or these next two questions will probably be our last because we're getting a little close on time. But I really want to talk about this because I know the answer from my experience with you, but I'm really curious to hear about how you feel with your employees and your colleagues. Do you believe you have a proactive personality, meaning you're someone who is relatively unconstrained by situational forces and who affects environmental change, or are you someone who identifies that things will just happen to you and you really don't have much control?
Yeah, I think so. I think in general, I'm relatively, you know, I don't react emotionally typically. That being said, I'm pretty passionate at
Yeah,
work and I care about what we do. I think it's important. So I think that's certainly been something I've worked on over the years, and um, something that I continue to try to work on, of kind of avoiding, you know how it goes in the accounting world. Something breaks and it's, oh, we need to fix it yesterday.
right. So
But
I guess
it's
for your sake, right? When something does break, you put in the time and the effort and make it work again, right? Like
right.
that's the type of person you are. Is you won't just throw your hands up and say, oh well, like it's going to be broken for a while. You're somebody who'll kind of dig in, right? We
Absolutely.
s- okay, so that helps. And then I guess, do you have any individuals that you currently work with that you feel meet that description? And if so, how do you feel working with them on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that is interesting, specifically in a more technical field like accounting, is the people who tend to rise into leadership roles are the ones who exhibit technical competencies early on.
Yeah,
Um, so I think kind of two parts to answering that question. The first is I absolutely have analysts that work for me, or that I work with, that exhibit very similar tendencies of, hey, this is a problem, or this is an opportunity to go improve something. We need to dig in and do that. And I certainly appreciate that. That's back to the earlier question. That's kind of what I'm looking for when I hire people, is that
right.
that caring and that work ethic. Um, and then I think you also get the individuals that don't feel like that necessarily, or it's more of a 9 to 5 kind of feel, right? And that's where it goes back to kind of empathizing with what people's goals are, and I think it's about finding the way to help everyone that on the team contribute to the best of their ability.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant way to put it. I definitely feel too that I typically mesh well with people who are also, because I believe I'm proactive. I believe I'm a problem solver like that, right?
Yeah.
So I've noticed that in my career, whether I was an associate or a manager or whatever you want to say, that I've meshed better with people who also share that same attitude. But it doesn't mean
Mhm.
that the other people are necessarily thrown off to the side, right? Something that you can find ways to motivate them, even if it's a person that's at the same level as you, right? Like where you focus on something that's maybe not as organizational beneficial, but is more individually beneficial for them or something like that, right?
Right.
So, no, I totally agree. Totally agree. Well, Steve, I think that's just about all the time we have on this interview. So, I really appreciate you taking the time out tonight. I know you're quite busy with year-end close, so thanks again for doing this, man. And I will chat with you soon.
Sounds good. Appreciate it, Tom.